Story 1. The Archivist of Whispers. Desperation is a quiet room. It's the 3 a.m. silence where the only sounds are your own breathing and the frantic calculations of your mind trying to stretch a dollar that has already been torn in half. My name is Leo, and I had been living in that quiet room for 6 months. A mountain of student debt, a dead-end freelance graphic design market, and the constant dull ache of failure had become my entire world. It was in this state of quiet desperation that I found the job listing. It wasn't on a normal job board. It was on a niche encrypted forum for specialized data handlers. The listing was posted by an entity called the Somnus Institute. The job title was vague, audio archivist. The requirements were minimal: a good pair of headphones, a high-speed internet connection, and absolute discretion. The pay, however, was astronomical, enough to clear my debt in less than a year. The work was remote. It seemed too good to be true, and in my experience, things that seem too good to be true usually are. I applied immediately. The interview process was non-existent. I was accepted via an encrypted email. The instructions were cold, clinical, and unnervingly specific. I would be sent a proprietary software package and a secure hard drive. My job was to listen to audio files from the drive and tag anomalies. The files were recordings of human sleep patterns. I was to listen for snoring, sleep-talking, teeth-grinding, any audible disruption, and tag it according to a complex classification system. The rules were the strangest part. I was to work only between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. I was to work in a room with no other ambient noise, and under no circumstances was I to use any third-party software to analyze or alter the audio files. I was to use only their provided interface. The final rule was underlined. The contents of these files are covered under a non-disclosure agreement of the highest classification. You will not speak of this work to anyone. The pay was deposited into my account the same day I agreed, a full month's salary in advance. My skepticism was drowned by a tidal wave of relief. I could finally pay rent without panicking. The equipment arrived a week later in a plain, heavy-duty Pelican case. Inside was the hard drive and a single sheet of paper with a long, complex password. I set myself up in my small apartment's spare bedroom, my new office. At precisely 11 p.m., I plugged in the drive and launched the proprietary software. The interface was stark and minimalist, a simple audio player with a timeline and a series of tagging buttons. I put on my best noise-canceling headphones, opened the first file, and began my new life as an archivist of whispers. For the first few weeks, the job was exactly as described, mind-numbingly boring. The files were just hours of human breathing. Inhale, exhale, the soft sigh of a sleeper turning over, the occasional guttural snore or a mumbled incoherent word. The keys. No, not that. 1. I would dutifully tag the anomaly, somniloquy fragmented, unintelligible, and move on. It was easy money, the quietest job in the world. The quiet, I would soon learn, was the entire point. The change began subtly. I started noticing a sound underneath the breathing. It was a faint, low-frequency hum, almost too low to hear, but you could feel it, a subtle pressure in your ears. It wasn't in every file, but it was becoming more frequent. The Somnus software, I noticed, seemed to actively filter this sound out. When the hum appeared, the main audio would dip slightly, as if the software was canceling it. But my headphones were good. Too good. I could still hear it, a faint, persistent drone in the background. My curiosity got the better of me. Violating the most important rule, I routed the audio from the Somnus player through my own professional-grade audio editing software, determined to isolate the hum. I applied a series of filters, peeling back the layers of breathing and ambient room tone. And then I heard it clearly. It wasn't just a hum. It was a voice. Or, more accurately, thousands of voices, all whispering at once, layered over each other into a single, low, resonant frequency. It was a choir of whispers. Most of it was unintelligible, a river of sibilant, rustling sounds. But sometimes, a single, clear phrase would rise out of the noise for a fraction of a second. "Did you see him? New_line. The new one is listening." Closer this time. I ripped my headphones off, my heart pounding. What was this? Were these other people's dreams? Was I listening to a collective unconscious? And what did they mean? The new one is listening. Were they talking about me? I tried to tell myself it was just pareidolia, my brain creating patterns out of random noise. But the feeling of being listened to, of being observed, was undeniable. I became obsessed. Every night, I would dive back into the audio, my own software running, trying to decipher the whispers, the sleepers, the people whose breathing I was supposed to be monitoring. They were just the carrier wave. The real signal was the choir of whispers underneath. Then a new sound emerged. It was a specific, recurring pattern within the hum. A rhythmic, guttural, clicking sound. Tisk, tisk, tisk. It was slow, patient, and utterly alien. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. Every time I heard it, the whispers would become agitated, frantic. "The Watcher, it's awake. Don't let it see you." My work started to affect my life. During the day, I was exhausted, jumpy. I'd be walking down the street and think I heard a faint whisper on the edge of hearing. I started having nightmares, dreams of vast, dark, empty rooms where the only sound was the slow, rhythmic tisk, tisk, tisk of the Watcher. The quiet of my own apartment became my enemy. I started leaving the TV on all the time, just for the noise. The silence I had once craved now felt heavy, pregnant, like it was listening. The breaking point came when I opened a file labeled subject_734_archive_night_42. The breathing was shallow, panicked. The hum of whispers was louder than ever, and the clicking sound was close. So close, it felt like it was right next to the microphone. I isolated the whispers, and this time, the phrase that emerged was crystal clear, spoken in a voice that was cold, ancient, and filled with a terrible patient amusement. "I see the archivist." I threw my equipment off the desk. It shattered on the floor. I stood there, panting, in my silent office, the statement echoing in my head. It knew about me. It knew my role. I had to know what this was. I spent the next day frantically trying to breach the Somnus Institute's security. I was a decent hacker in my youth, and my desperation made me better. I found a hole, a maintenance log left open by a careless technician. And in that log, I found a hidden file, a single password-protected text document. It was titled archivist_debriefing_failure_protocol. I spent hours trying to crack the password. Finally, I tried a name from one of the whispers I had deciphered. Hezekiah. The file opened. It was a log, written by the archivist who had my job before me. What I read made my world crumble. The Somnus Institute wasn't a sleep study center. It was a psychic listening post. The sleepers were carefully selected psychics, people with a natural sensitivity to the supernatural, what the log called resonators. Their minds, in the unguarded state of sleep, acted as antennas. They weren't picking up dreams. They were picking up it. The log didn't give it a name. It only called it the static, or the presence. An ancient, non-physical conscious entity. It didn't live in a place. It lived in the absence of things. It lived in silence, in darkness, in empty spaces, in the static between radio stations. A being of pure, disembodied awareness. The whispers were the thoughts of the resonators, their minds reacting in terror as they brushed against this vast alien consciousness in their sleep. And the clicking sound, the watcher, that was the entity itself, its voice, its attention focusing. The Somnus Institute's purpose was to monitor it. But the entity's signal was growing stronger. It was beginning to leak from the minds of the sleepers into the world, causing paranoia, hallucinations, and reality glitches in the areas around the sleepers. That's where the archivist came in. We weren't tagging sleep apnea. The anomalies we were supposed to be tagging were the moments the entity's presence became too strong. Our job, the log explained with horrifying clarity, was to act as a psychic filter, a human firewall. By focusing our conscious, rational mind on the recordings, we were unknowingly absorbing the psychic energy. Our focused attention grounded the signal, contained it, preventing it from leaking further. We were a dam holding back an ocean of madness. The high pay wasn't for the work. It was for the toll it took. The log described the previous archivist's descent into madness, the nightmares, the constant feeling of being watched, the whispers following him into his waking life. The entity had imprinted on him. He could no longer separate his own thoughts from its whispers. He had become a permanent, walking antenna. The final entry read, "I have to break the connection. The equipment is the conduit. I have to destroy it. I think it knows what I'm about to do." The clicking, "It's in my room now." The log ended there. I stared at the screen, a profound, soul-crushing terror washing over me. I was the new dam, and the dam was already cracking. I did the only thing I could think of. I gathered every piece of equipment the Institute had sent me. The hard drive, the broken software dongle, the headphones, and I put them in a heavy-duty bag. I drove out of the city to a deep, fast-moving river, and I threw the bag into the water. I watched it sink into the dark, cold depths. I felt a wave of relief. It was over. I was free. I drove home and slept for the first time in weeks. A deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up to silence. A perfect, beautiful silence. The TV was off. There was no traffic outside. I lay in bed, basking in the peace. It was the most profound quiet I had ever experienced. Too quiet. I sat up. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a presence. It was heavy, thick, and watchful. The same silence I had felt in the deepest, most terrifying parts of the audio files. And then I heard it. It wasn't coming from headphones. It wasn't coming from speakers. It was inside my own head, as clear as my own thoughts. T. The Watcher. I scrambled out of bed, my heart seizing. I had destroyed the conduit, the equipment that connected me to it. But the previous archivist had been wrong. The equipment was never the real conduit. My mind was, by focusing on it, by obsessing over it, by inviting it in, I had created a permanent connection. I hadn't been grounding the signal. I had been tuning myself to its frequency. I ran to the living room and turned on the television, blasting the volume. I turned on the radio, the stereo, my computer speakers, filling the apartment with a wall of chaotic, competing noise. The clicking in my head faded, pushed back by the barrage of sound. But it didn't disappear. It was still there, underneath it all, waiting patiently in the quiet spaces between the noise. That was a year ago. I live my life in a self-made prison of noise. I never let my apartment be silent. I sleep with 3 fans running and a white noise machine on full blast. I wear earbuds playing loud music whenever I go outside. I have become a man who is terrified of peace and quiet, but I know it's a temporary solution. The entity is patient. It has all the time in the world, and it knows that eventually the power will go out. The batteries will die. The music will stop, and in the perfect, beautiful, all-consuming silence that follows, the watcher will finally have my full attention. Story 2. The Thaw Man. In our family, we didn't have a Groundhog Day. We had the Thaw Man. It was a strange, hyper-local tradition in our isolated corner of northern Minnesota, a piece of folklore my father had inherited from his father, stretching back generations. The story was simple. Every year, on the day of the first true thaw after the deep freeze of winter, a single perfect ice sculpture of a man would appear on the frozen surface of our lake, Lake Innis. My father would take me down to the shore and we'd watch it. "He's the keeper of the cold, Michael," he would say, his voice serious. "As long as he's here, the deep winter holds. When he melts, spring can truly begin." To me, as a child, it was magic. The Thaw Man was always different, yet always the same. A tall, gaunt figure, perfectly carved, its features indistinct but undeniably human. Sometimes it was standing, sometimes kneeling. Its appearance was a town event. People would come from miles around to see it, to take pictures, to marvel at the natural phenomenon. The official explanation was some unique combination of wind patterns and pressure cracks on the lake. A geological quirk. But our family knew better. We didn't just observe the Thaw Man. We were its custodians. The tradition had a darker side, a rule my father impressed upon me with a solemnity that bordered on fear. "You must never touch him, Michael. Never get too close. And you must never, ever be the last person to leave the shore when he appears. You observe, and then you leave. You let the town have him." I grew up, went to college, and moved to Chicago to become a structural engineer. The Thaw Man became a fond, quirky childhood memory. When my father passed away from a sudden heart attack one February, I was forced to return to the old house on the lake to settle his affairs. The grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket, made worse by the oppressive silence of the Minnesota winter. I spent a week sorting through my father's life, a quiet existence documented in fishing logs and receipts from the local hardware store. In his bedside table, I found a small, leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's. Its pages were filled with my father's familiar handwriting. He had continued the journal after my grandfather died. It wasn't a diary. It was a logbook. A logbook for the Thaw Man. The entries were chillingly precise, spanning over 60 years. Each entry recorded the date of the first thaw, the time the Thaw Man appeared, and a brief description of its posture. But the final entry for each year was always the same. It was a name. Clara Mills, 1958. John Peterson, 1972. Sarah Ann Miller, 1994. I recognized the names. They were people from the town or the surrounding area who had vanished during the winter. Their disappearances were local tragedies, unsolved mysteries. They'd gone out hunting or their car had broken down, and they were never seen again, lost to the vast, unforgiving wilderness. According to my family's logbook, every year for 60 years, a person had vanished on the same day the Thaw Man appeared. My father's last entry was from the previous year. It described the Thor man kneeling, its head bowed, and then a name, Elias Vance. I remembered the flyers in the town post office. A young hiker who had gone missing in the state park. A cold, horrifying realization began to dawn. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. This wasn't a quirky tradition. It was something else entirely. That week, the weather turned. The iron grip of winter loosened. The temperature crept above freezing for the first time in months. The first thaw. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. On the third day, I woke to a strange silence. The gentle dripping of melting icicles from the eaves had stopped. A cold front had moved in overnight, and the temperature had plummeted, flash freezing the entire world. I knew. I pulled on my father's heavy coat and walked down the familiar path to the lakeshore. The surface of Lake Innis was a vast gray sheet of polished glass, and there, in the center, about 100 yards out, it stood, the Thaw Man. It was standing this year, tall and proud, its form impossibly perfect, refracting the pale morning light. It looked like a masterpiece of crystal sculpture. My childhood sense of wonder was gone, replaced by a profound and sickening terror. This beautiful thing was a tombstone. I was about to turn and leave, to honor the terrified warnings in my father's journal, when I saw something at the base of the sculpture. A small, dark shape frozen into the ice near the Thaw Man's feet. It was a backpack, a modern, brightly colored hiking backpack. My mind raced. Someone had been out on the ice. They must have been there when the flash freeze hit. Were they still out here? I did the one thing my father had warned me never to do. I stepped onto the ice. The surface was slick and treacherous, but thick and solid. I made my way out towards the sculpture, my boots crunching on the frozen surface. As I got closer, the scale of the Thaw Man was awe-inspiring. It was easily 9 feet tall. The detail was incredible. It wasn't just a man-shaped block of ice. I could see the subtle folds of a long coat, the outline of fingers on a clenched fist. I reached the backpack. It was frozen solid to the lake surface. A small laminated ID tag was attached to the zipper. The name on it was Chloe Larson. There were fresh flyers in town for a college student from Duluth who had gone hiking 2 days ago and hadn't returned. I looked up at the Thaw Man standing over the backpack like a silent sentinel, and I saw its face. For my entire life, the Thaw Man's features had been smooth, indistinct, but now, up close, I could see them clearly. The face was a mask of serene, frozen agony. The mouth was slightly open, the eyes wide. It was a perfect crystalline portrait of Chloe Larson. A scream died in my throat. The Thaw Man wasn't a natural phenomenon. It wasn't a spirit. It was the missing person. The entity, the keeper of the cold, didn't just mark a disappearance. It was the disappearance. It found someone lost in the cold and it transformed them, preserving them, turning them into a monument of ice to mark its territory. Horrified, I turned to run back to the shore. But as I did, I heard a sound that would haunt me forever. A soft, deep, grinding groan, like a glacier moving. It came from the sculpture. I looked back. The Thaw Man's head, the frozen head of Chloe Larson, was slowly, impossibly, turning to look at me. I fell on the slick ice, scrambling backwards like a crab, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. The statue, a solid block of ice, was moving. Its arm, the one with the clenched fist, began to rise, the movement accompanied by a deafening chorus of cracking and splintering ice. It took a step. The ice of the lake groaned under its immense weight. It was coming for me. I finally found my footing and ran, my feet slipping, my lungs burning with frigid air. I didn't dare look back. I could hear it behind me, the rhythmic crunch, groan, crack of its footsteps on the ice. It was not fast, but it was relentless. I reached the shore, my legs collapsing under me. I lay in the snow, gasping for breath, and looked back. The thaw man had stopped at the edge of the water. It could not leave the lake. It stood there, a towering crystalline figure, watching me. Its purpose was clear. The tradition had been broken. I had touched its sacred ground. I had discovered its secret. I was not a casual observer anymore. I was part of the ritual. I spent the next day in a state of paranoid terror. I called the police and anonymously reported the backpack on the lake. I watched from my window as a rescue team in insulated suits went out, their faces grim. They used saws to cut the backpack from the ice. They saw the thaw man, of course. They marveled at it. "Can you believe nature can do that?" one of them said, his voice carrying across the still air. They didn't see the face. From a distance, it was just ice. They left, and I was alone again. With it. All day it stood on the edge of the lake, motionless, a statue, a silent, patient predator. It was waiting. But for what? The answer came as the sun began to set. The temperature started to rise again. The thaw was back on. And as the air warmed, the thaw man began to melt. But it didn't just shrink or lose its shape. As the outer layers of ice began to drip away, the face of Chloe Lawson softened, then dissolved, replaced by another, older face I recognized from the town's history books. Then another, and another. The thaw man was shedding its skins. It was cycling through its previous victims, its previous forms. It was a living history of the town's sorrow. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, from my window. Faces I had only seen in old photographs flickered across its form. The hiker from last year, the farmer from a decade ago, a child from the 1950s. Each face was preserved for a moment before melting into the next. As the last of the sun's light faded, the thaw man had shrunk by half. It was no longer a towering figure, but the size of a man. And the face it wore now was the last one in the cycle, the original one. A gaunt, bearded man in 19th century clothing. The first name in my family's logbook, my own ancestor, who had supposedly vanished in a hunting accident. The first victim, the first name in my family's logbook, my own ancestor, who had supposedly vanished in a hunting accident. The first victim, the source of the curse. In the dark, the melting figure was just a shadow, but I knew it was still there, and I knew what would happen. The logbook had been clear. When the thaw man melts, spring can begin. But it wasn't a metaphor. The melting wasn't the end. It was a release. It released the entity, the cold, hungry spirit, back into the world to seek its next vessel before the deep freeze ended. My father and his father before him, they were not just observers. They were the guardians. Their job was to ensure no one interfered, to let the cycle complete, to let the entity claim a random soul lost in the wilderness. It was a terrible, passive sacrifice to keep the town, to keep our family safe. But I had broken the rule. I had stepped on the ice. I had involved myself. And in doing so, I had offered myself as a new, better sacrifice. A sacrifice tied to the land, to the house, a permanent custodian. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the lake. Around midnight, the temperature dropped again, a final vicious snap of cold. The dripping stopped, and then I saw it. A faint, pale light moving from the lake shore, up the path, towards my house. It wasn't walking. It was flowing, a river of phosphorescent cold. It reached the porch, and seeped under the door, a creeping mist that chilled the air in the room to sub-zero temperatures. The mist coalesced in the center of the living room, rising, taking a familiar, gaunt, human shape. It was no longer made of ice, but of pure, concentrated cold. A hole in the warmth of the world. It did not have a face. It did not need one. I could feel its ancient, predatory intelligence, its focus entirely on me. It had claimed its victim from the wild for a century. But I had presented it with a new opportunity, a permanent home, a willing or unwilling partner, a new Blackwood to Ankh, merging with me. The last thing I saw with my own eyes was the window, frosting over from the inside, a beautiful, intricate fern-like pattern spreading across the glass. Now I see the world through a different lens. I am the custodian. I feel the turn of the seasons, the deep slumber of the earth under the snow. My house is quiet. The town is safe. Next winter, there will be a thaw. A figure will appear on the ice. It will be beautiful. The townspeople will come and marvel. But this time, it will not be the face of a stranger. It will be the face of a man who loved this lake as a boy. A man who broke a promise. It will be my face, and I will stand there, a silent, frozen sentinel, the new keeper of the cold. And I will wait.